It's the afternoon of June 2nd, 2010. We're at the Eagleton Institute. This is the Rutgers program on the governor. I'm Aron of NJN News. We're going to continue our conversations this afternoon with Ed McGlynn. Ed served throughout the Kane years, first in the Attorney General's office, then as a Deputy Chief of Staff, and in the second term, he was Chief of Staff to Governor Kane. Good to see you again, Ed.
Michael, good to see you.
Are you a Jersey native?
I am.
Where were you born?
Kearney. Actually born at St. Michael's in Newark, and then lived in Kearney till I was 9. Moved to North Caldwell when my father made a few dollars. And then went to college out in Illinois, met my wife there. We moved back to New Jersey, and I went to law school at Seton Hall. We lived in Caldwell at the time. Then moved to Point Pleasant Beach, and now live in Brielle.
What did your father do?
Father's an attorney, ran for Congress against Peter Rodino in 1952 or 4 and got second place.
How large a family was the McGlynn?
There are my older brother Richard, who, as you know, ran for governor in 1981 against the eventual nominee and governor, Tom Kane. I have a sister who is 4 years older than I am. She lives in Mountain Lakes, and myself.
Your mother?
Mother has passed away, was from Easton, Pennsylvania. My dad was a Lafayette man. They met at Easton when Lafayette was an all-male school, and they would import the Easton High School female students to do plays. And he was involved in drama and theatrical productions, and that's how they met.
And where in Illinois did you go to school?
I went to a little school called McKendree University now, and I'm actually on the board of trustees there. It was a great place for me to go at the time. It helped me grow up and mature, and I've remained dedicated to the college over the past 40 years or so.
And you went to Seton Hall Law School immediately after college?
No, I had 2 years where I worked for General Motors in St. Louis as a labor relations representative. Then came back because my wife needed to finish college. She finished in 1970, and we came back, and I went to law school at night. We had one daughter at the time. We had our second child my second year into law school.
And after you got your law degree, what did you do?
Practiced law with my dad and a fellow who's now a Superior Court judge in Essex County. The firm is McGlynn, and McCormick. My brother had left the firm to first become a BPU commissioner appointed by Brendan Byrne, and then to become a Superior Court judge. So it was kind of natural for me just to flow right to that firm.
He's older than you, Richard?
He is.
By how?
Richard's 7 years and 364 days older. It was a Planned Parenthood, I think.
At what point did you drift into politics or jump in?
Well, when I first finished and passing the bar in 1974, I became the planning board attorney in Point Pleasant Beach almost immediately. Then the borough solicitor, and followed politics. As I said, my father had run for Congress and lost. He had run for mayor of Kearney and lost. My brother had run for governor and lost. And then all of a sudden I decided I wanted to at least follow politics, not necessarily be in an elective office, but I did follow it.
Were you involved in the 1977 bid for governor by Tom Kane?
I was not. I actually ended up in state government because our law office was at 80 Main Street in West Orange on the same floor as Kimmelman, Wolf, and Sampson. And I became friends with Erwin Kimmelman, who was always referred to as judge because he had been a Superior Court judge. And I first went into government as a special assistant to him in March of 1982.
I know that building, 80 Main in West Orange. It's still got a lot of law firms.
There are still a lot of law firms. It was kind of the first major building built in West Orange when the lawyers started to flee Newark.
What was Erwin Kimmelman's connection to Tom Kane?
I think Erwin may have represented the Kane family at some point. I mean, he was I think he was brought in as one of the lead attorneys in the recount because he had been a former chancery judge and well respected as a chancery judge, extremely bright, Harvard law school educated. And I think that they formed a bond. No, I'm going to take it even further than that. They may have campaigned together for the assembly at some point in South Orange, or Irwin may have been the campaign manager in South Orange when Governor Kane had South Orange as part of his assembly seat. So I think that's how they got to know one another.
And Kimmelman served in the assembly?
I'm not sure if he did serve in the assembly, Michael. I don't know.
I think he served one term.
He may have. He may have been seatmates with Phil Kaltenbacher, who the governor became very good friends with and appointed Phil as chairman of the Port Authority, if you remember.
Right. So it was Erwin Kimmelman who recruited you into state government?
It was.
Something tells me in the back of my mind that Kimmelman played a fundraising role during that Kane run for governor?
I don't remember that. I mean, my tie to Erwin Kimmelman was because I was secretary of the Ethics Committee in Essex County, and Erwin had become a vice chairman of the Ethics Committee, and we just got to know one another.
In the Bar Association?
Yes. Yeah. And so when he became Attorney General, I was kind of looking to do something different at that point in time, and we had a good discussion about could I come work for him, and I ended up working for him.
What kind of law had you been practicing?
I had done a lot of negligence work. As I said, I was the planning board attorney, municipal attorney in Point Pleasant Beach. It was kind of an overall general practice.
You were the a local government attorney in Point Pleasant Beach while working out of West Orange?
Correct, but I lived in Point Pleasant Beach. So, I mean, they were all night meetings anyway. The council meetings met at night, or the planning board met at night. So it worked out fine.
So what did Kimmelman ask you to do?
Well, I was his special assistant, and if you remember, the Office of the Attorney General at that point had a myriad of agencies reporting to it. Consumer Affairs, Gaming Enforcement, Motor Vehicles, State Police, Violent Crimes Compensation Board, ELEC, and he asked me to be kind of the overseer of any legislation which might impact on the department. And that's what I did for him as a special assistant for a relatively short period of time.
How long?
Till I got there in March of '83 and left in June of '84.
So you didn't start with the administration. The administration was more than a year old by the time you joined it.
Right. If you remember, there was some chaos during the first year of the administration, and Greg Stevens became his chief of staff. Greg did not have legislative experience or wasn't crazy about the legislature, and I ended up being his deputy.
By virtue of the experience you had under Kimmelman.
He had heard about me from some people. I don't know how in the State House, because I'd spent a lot of time there while the legislature was in session.
Let's stay with Kimmelman for a little bit.
Sure.
He was one of the more controversial members of the Kane administration.
Well, he was pretty hard-nosed. I think was a very good attorney general, and deep down was a very decent, I shouldn't say even deep down, he was a very decent guy, but he didn't come across that way. He came off as being gruff, short in his comments to people, and yeah, he was a little bit controversial, but not so much that it got him into a whole lot of difficulty.
Was there an incident that I'm not sure, but it seems, again, memory seems to suggest there was an incident in which Kimmelman's perhaps sense of self-importance manifested itself.
No, there was a concern about his sense of self-importance, but it never manifested itself that I can remember where there were legislative hearings or he was reprimanded by the governor or anything such as that. You know, Governor Kane had a unique ability to let his cabinet officers in particular have access to him. And he would do that at times without staff knowing about it. And Erwin had the ability to do that on a pretty regular basis, and there was some concern among the staff members that he was perhaps having too much access. But I can't remember that there was a major controversy during that time.
Were you a member of Kimmelman's inner circle?
I was, yeah. As inner as that could possibly be. I mean, he had Tom Grealish, who passed away, was his first assistant. Passed away not during the time I was there. I mean, subsequently, as a young man, passed away. And he had a fellow by the name of Jack Carbone, who became an election law expert, had worked in the recall, who was only there for a short period of time, and I then became executive assistant replacing Carbone. So
Your office was directly outside the Attorney General's office?
The flying wedge, as they call it, upstairs on the 8th floor. The 8th floor, there was the Attorney General, then next to him was the first assistant, and then the executive assistant, and that's where my office was.
The 8th floor of the Justice Complex.
Correct. Correct.
You recall any legislation that you worked on?
We did a lot of motor vehicle reform during that period of time. And there was a controversy that developed, as I remember, with the Division of Motor Vehicles and the then director of the Division of Motor Vehicles. And there was always state police. I mean, we used to kid about any time there was legislation concerning state police and what impact it would have on state police, we'd get a fiscal note back from, you'd need a lieutenant, 2 sergeants, 8 patrolmen, 12 cars. And so we did a lot of state police stuff too. But I did a lot of work on the Office of the Attorney General budget from all of the different agencies which had to be coordinated and then presented to the legislature.
Cliff Snedeker was the head of motor vehicles.
Yeah. And you remember there was an issue concerning Bill Taggart, and I think it was over photo IDs, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And Taggart had been a big supporter of Governor Kane during the election, and apparently he was involved in Kaltenbacher, or Kaltenbacher somehow was tied in with Taggart. I mean, I don't want that to be emphatic that I know that, but Taggart bid on this project and it was awarded to him, and then there was some controversy about how could this be. He was so close to Kane, and the award ended up being rescinded, as I remember.
And Snedeker resigned, I believe.
Snedeker resigned. But you have a very good memory, Mike.
Thank you.
Very good. Snedeker did resign.
And Kimmelman didn't last too long.
Kimmelman lasted the entire first term.
Did he?
He did.
Ah.
Yeah. He went back to Kimmelman, Wolf, and Sampson, but was only there a short time, and then went on the bench and sat in Hudson County.
Tom Kane put him on the bench.
Tom Kane put him on the bench. He was the first guy after I left in 1990 to call me and help me out.
Really?
Honest.
Is he still alive?
He's still alive. Apparently has a neurological impairment and cannot walk. But he kept himself in great shape during that period of time.
Yeah.
And it's some disease. He was a runner, he constantly. And he was wild. I mean, he used to, he'd come into the office and get there fairly early and demand other people get there fairly early. And he had some dislike. Do you remember Jim Barry?
Yes, the head of Consumer
Affairs. And was the head of Consumer Affairs.
And I think he was a legislator
briefly
out of Morris County.
Right. He had been a legislator. And Irwin didn't think that he worked very hard. And so at 9 o'clock in the morning, he'd call me into his office and say, come on. I said, well, what are you going to do? He said, we're going to call Jim Barry, Consumer Affairs. Of course, they were in Newark. So Irwin couldn't see them because he had to come down to Trenton every day. So he'd call, and this poor young lady we had on the phone and say, is Mr. Barry in? No, he's not. Where is he? I don't know where he is, sir, but who is this? This is Irwin Kimmelman. I want to speak to him now. And you didn't have cell phones, so this poor girl would end up getting a little bit upset on the other end. And he did it pretty regularly. So it was kind of a funny incident.
You remember anything else he was involved in during that first term?
Like it's almost 30 years ago now, as a matter of fact. And I was there for such a short period of time that I can't tell you there were, real hot button issues. We had criminal justice. Don Belsol was the head of criminal justice at that time.
He was a memorable figure. He was a strong personality.
Don had been the prosecutor in Morris County, I think, and he was a very strong personality. And of course, we had gaming enforcement, and that was kind of in its relative infancy. Resorts opened, in '76, I think, and so all the new casinos were coming online. I do remember having meetings with, I thought county chair people were rough, county chairmen were rough, and that they always wanted something every day. I've never dealt with casino industry people like this. They want something different every single day.
And who had to deal with that? You?
But the general would deal with it, but I would be part of those, meetings.
What would they want? Relaxation of certain rules?
Anything. Just, you're not doing enough for me. You got to do, you know, if the tax is 8%, we want it to be 5%. Or if there's a luxury tax, we don't want the luxury tax. Or there's a parking fee, we don't want the parking fee. We don't want anything. We just want to make money.
How were they to deal with?
Horrible. Horrible. And that's wrong to classify all of them as being horrible, but there were certain of the individuals which were a little bit...
Were they rougher than the other people you had to deal with?
Demanding. Just demanding, that's all.
How do you think that industry has fared over the 30 years since then?
I mean, they were doing fine for a while, and now, obviously, they're being hurt tremendously. They're being hurt by what's surrounding them. I'm on the racing commission. Took my dad's seat on the racing commission, but when Governor Whitman appointed me in 1995, and been on since. And the casinos have killed the racing industry, essentially, and going to be difficult to save. And it appears that because of what's happened in Delaware and New York and Pennsylvania, that there is a significant amount of reduction in revenue for Atlantic City, which is not good for the region.
Did Greg Stevens call you to
He did.
ask you to come over?
Well, I'll tell you what, my daughter had her tonsils out, and I was in Jersey Shore Medical Center, and I got a call from Greg and asking me if I could come and meet with him, and I told him obviously I couldn't do it then, but I suspected that I was going to be offered a position when I met with him. I mean, I'm not sure why I suspected it, but I did.
Well, I guess if one gets a call like that, that's one obvious possibility.
Yes, yes. And there was some disarray, and there was still disarray in the governor's office, and it was pretty well known that disarray had existed, and I think Greg was looking to move people around and bring some new people in.
Let's go back a couple of years. Your brother ran in the '81 Republican primary.
He did.
So you must have been working for him.
I was.
What did you do for him?
I was kind of the campaign consultant, the inside campaign consultant. Did a great job. We finished last.
In a field of?
Field of 8.
8.
13 on the Democratic side. I'm not sure I can name them all now. 8 on the Republican side. It started with Pat Kramer, who was the mayor of Patterson, was in the lead for a long period of time, and he just kept falling down. Then Bo Sullivan, you know, he was kind of the business guy. Barry Parker was in it. Jack Rafferty. Tony Imperial accused my brother of wearing lace underwear. And a few others. I'm sorry, I can't remember who they were. But when all was said and done, it cost us $69 a vote. We got like 5,680 votes, and when you divided that into the amount of money we had raised, we would have been better off walking around the streets and finding people who were drunk and saying, you know, here's $20, go vote for Rich McGlynn.
What county was he from? Essex?
Rich was from Essex. Yeah.
Was that the year that he filed a lawsuit against
Yes.
NJN?
Yes, and it's still, I mean, I think it's one of the longest written opinions ever done by the New Jersey Supreme Court, if that's, you know, anything to be proud of. But it was he and Jack Rafferty. You guys at NGN, and I don't remember if it was you particularly, but you did a report on the race.
Wasn't me because I joined in '82, but go ahead.
Okay. Someone did a report on the race and only interviewed the 4, quote, leading candidates. And there were no polls to say who was a leading candidate. There was no one had indicated how much money had been raised, if that made you a leading candidate. It's just a decision had been made by the editorial board, whomever your agency was at that point, that you were going to declare, and I don't mean you, Michael Aron, I mean the NJN was going to declare who the 4 leading candidates were and go out and interview them, and then excluded the other 4.
And that went up to the Supreme Court
It did.
during the campaign?
It did.
And what did the court decide?
As I remember, the court decided that, and I didn't handle the case, a guy by the name of Ted Bozanellis, who is the assignment judge now in Morris County, was counsel to the campaign. The Supreme Court ruled that there had to be equal time. It was essentially the equal time case. Yeah.
Did NJN come through and do an interview subsequent to
that?
They
did, sure. They did. That included all 8 candidates, and I think at that point they had to include the 13 on the other side also. And then, remember, I mean, Governor Kane didn't become a candidate until after we all attended the national convention in Dearborn. It was in Detroit, really, in 1980.
80.
Yes.
80.
80.
Or
81.
No, 80. It was a presidential year.
That's right. So 80. Everybody who was a potential gubernatorial candidate had a party out in Dearborn. I mean, we did that. Kramer and Sullivan, Parker, and Jack Rafferty. Tony did in Imperial. But everybody had a party out there. The only one who didn't was the reporter for NJN at the time, who was covering the national convention, Thomas Howard Kane.
That's right. I remember hearing about that.
Yeah.
So that seemed unfair to the rest of the field that he was getting all that airtime?
No, I mean, the best politician I've ever dealt with in my life is Governor Kane. So, I mean,
How so?
Because he's brilliant. I mean, he's always got, you know, we used to say that he's got the kettle brewing in the office, and he's stoking the fire a little bit, and he's turning it, and I mean, he knew how to deal with the conservatives, with the liberals, with the Democrats. They're probably not as well with the Republicans, but I mean, he was a master. He was a master at setting policy, knowing what he had to do from a policy standpoint, and then going out and selling that policy and letting the people in his office do what they were supposed to do. And, you know, I went into him one day after I became chief of staff, and I said to him, I would like to bring so-and-so in as deputy chief of staff, and he looked at me and he said, well, why are you telling me that? I said, well, I thought you might want to know. He said, no, you run the office. You surround yourself with the people you want to surround yourself with. We're going to be fine, but that's your job.
Interesting. So what did you do as deputy chief of staff?
Did the legislation, a lot of the legislative work, and a lot of the background in dealing with the county chairman, because Greg wasn't crazy about dealing with the county chairman.
Why not?
They're a difficult group.
Demanding?
Very demanding. They were very demanding. I'm going to tell you what I did, and when I became chief of staff, the first thing I did, one of the first things I did, is I called a meeting of all the 21 county chairmen. And I did it at one of the local restaurants. And I had them set up the table in a U-shaped fashion, so I could sit at the head of the table. And there were, of course, 21 of them from the 21 counties. Garfield DeMarco is a Fulbright scholar. He's chairman of the chairman at that point.
Burlington County.
Right, Burlington County. So I got Paul Walcott, who was our deputy press secretary. Remember, we had a softball team, and I said to Paul, give me the catcher's mask. And he said, what? He said, get me the catcher's mask. I'm going to take it with me tonight. And we went to the meeting, and everybody sat around, and it was just started as soon as I got there. You're not doing this, you're not doing that. I said, time out. And I turned around and faced the wall, and I put the catcher's mask over my face. And I turned around and said, okay, I'm ready now. And the place went nuts. They went crazy. That, and then I just inundated them with paper from that point on.
What do you mean?
Well, they were always saying, we can't get enough jobs. You won't give us enough jobs. We can't give you, you won't give us any appointments. So the first appointment that came up, and we had to do this again, we don't have emails at that point. The first appointment we had, whether it's to the Port Authority or Boxing Commission or the Asparagus Council or something, all 21 of them I sent a letter. You know, we have an opening on the board of racing commissioners. Would you please, and I have until Friday at 4 o'clock, please submit whatever names you want. And then I'd get another opening, and I did it for like 10 or 15 times till they were finally calling me up and saying, please, don't send me any more, you know, or I've got a job opening here, legitimate job opening, but I've got a job opening, send a letter to every one of them. You need a job opening, here are the skill sets that we need. Give me back those people that you think would be qualified for this position. Nothing.
So the complaints were hollow.
But they certainly stopped. I don't know if they were hollow, but they stopped. I mean, they just like to grouse, you know, moan and groan about this not being right, that not being right. Kane's coming into the district, why aren't they calling me? So we instituted a plan to make sure that every assemblyman was called. And you know, Governor Kane loved to sign bills in Democratic districts.
Why?
Well, because that's the way he knew that he'd get Frank Graves to not talk bad about him, or John Russo, or, I mean, I had in my office a map of the state, and I don't remember if you saw this, that had push pins on it. So I could see where we had sent him or where he had decided to go each day, because we knew that we had to get him into the New York market at least a couple times a week, and we had to get him into the Philadelphia market a couple times a week. So even as I went through and looked at the schedule of where events were, and I think you and I had this discussion at one time, you interviewed me about what do you do as chief of staff?
Right.
And one of the things was you do the schedule. And I got a computer printout every day of what he had been invited to, and I'd put my recommendations in and send them home to him every night so he could, him being the governor, he could say whether or not he wanted to do them. But I was pretty cognizant that we wanted to get him into the Philadelphia market or the New York market on a regular basis. So we did that.
You worked on legislation for Greg Stevens and the governor.
Mm-hmm.
Who were the key legislators you had to work with to make things happen?
Well, Alan Karcher was there at the time. And the governor did a masterful job at painting him into a corner. And Alan was very, very powerful.
Alan was the Speaker of the Assembly, a Democrat,
Yeah.
intellectually
Brilliant.
florid character.
Yeah, and another good guy, but pretty gruff. And the governor, I think, because he had either served with him in the legislature, but he knew how to handle him. And so he was difficult to work with. John Russo was difficult to work with until we figured out that if we played tennis with Tommy, everything was fine.
John Russo was Senate President at that point? Or was Majority Leader under Carmen Arecchio, maybe?
Yeah, I think he was probably Majority Leader and then became Senate President.
Right.
But once we had tennis with Tommy, everything was fine at Drumthwacket.
At Drumthwacket?
Drumthwacket. Drumthwacket has a beautiful clay tennis court. And John Russo used to love to play tennis. And, we'd get into these. Remember, John ran against the governor in the primary in '85, or ran as a Democrat in the Democratic primary in 1985, looking to unseat Governor Kane.
Right.
But then, after he did not win that primary, and Peter Shapiro won the primary, and he then became Senate President, we realized one of the ways to get John Russo calmed down was tennis with Tommy.
Did the governor enjoy that too?
He did enjoy it. I mean, the governor loves playing tennis. And then it gave John an opportunity, it gave John an opportunity to see what the governor was like away from the State House, too.
Was Drumthwacket being used at that point in time?
No. I mean, Drumthwacket, I used them for my staff meetings from 1985 through the end of the administration. And I stayed all 4 years during that administration. We would do Friday morning staff meetings at Drumthwacket with the key staff, because it was, we were away from the State House, we wouldn't be interrupted. And every once in a while, I would end up staying there after late sessions or late meetings. But the governor
staying over?
Yes, on the second floor. The bedroom's up on the second floor.
Did the governor ever stay over?
I don't remember the governor ever staying there. But
he used to go home to Livingston?
Livingston, correct. Yeah, and pretty. Other than when we traveled, and we did start doing some traveling during my tenure there, other than when we traveled, he would be in Livingston virtually every night.
You say that you sometimes would gather at 10 a.m. on a Friday with key staff members. Who do you remember sitting around in those meetings? Who were the key people?
Simone Tucci was our scheduler. Dorothy Barkholz was our briefing secretary.
What does that mean, briefly?
She's the one who would prepare, like, what event is he going to today? Who's he going to see at the event? What time is it going to start? If you're doing a graduation, you're going up to Syracuse. You're going to meet with the president beforehand at 4. I mean, it was a whole. I think every governor gets one of these every morning. It's a briefing paper as to what they're going to do all day long, who they're going to see, and then I would have the chief of policy and planning, who at that point was Brenda Davis. Chief counsel would be Mike Cole, and probably the key person that if anybody asked me who could I have not done without in the administration, I would have said Carl Golden.
How so?
Just the best. And, you know, Carl was a press person to begin with, and so he loved the press. The governor was a press person, and he loved the press. I mean, you know how we could never get him away from the podium after he'd finish a press conference. He'd just stand there and ask all the, you know, Carl would say, no more questions, and he'd stand there for an hour and a half and ask questions. But Carl with the best one-liners of anybody, and just the one that kept everybody on an even keel all the time.
Except reporters. He kept us off balance sometimes.
Did he? Well,
yeah.
I mean, I think he was a critical connection for me, personally. I think the governor would say the same thing, but for me, it was a good way to start the morning. I knew when I walked in my office and we had an intercom system, I knew that if I looked down at the button and Golden was calling me, Golden would have a few great one-liners for me to start the day.
That's right. Before there was caller ID, we used to look at what line.
Yeah, that's right. Decide whether or not you really want to answer it.
Why did Kane change chiefs of staff between the first term and the second term?
Greg said he was going to leave. He announced the night of the election, on Tuesday night of Election Day, whatever November date that was, that he was planning on leaving and going with a consulting firm down in Washington. And then there was a period of time from that date until December 24th, when the governor told me I was going to be the chief of staff, that a number of names popped up. So it was not like it just happened automatically. Gene McCaffrey was one.
He had run the Civil Service Commission?
He had, and just passed away, I found out on April the 24th of this year. Bob Huey's name came up.
DEP Commissioner?
DEP Commissioner. Gormley got into the middle of that one somehow. And then I did two things. I went up and saw John Hanson, who had been our chief fundraiser, and told him I wanted to be chief of staff. And I walked in and said to the governor that, Governor, I want you to know I want to be your chief of staff. And the day he named me, or the day he told me I was going to be chief of staff, he said to me he wouldn't have done it had I not asked him. Which I thought, Roger Bodman was another one that got me. In fact, Roger was so in the middle of the mix. That's again, this was the governor with the kettle in the office, brewing things and stirring things up. You know, I'm not going to just name somebody right away. Let's see who we can throw into the kettle and who's going to rise to the occasion. So, I mean, he throws these names out. Well, maybe I'll think about Huey, maybe I'll think about McCaffrey, maybe I'll think about Bodman, I don't know. We'll decide. And so I walked into him and obviously thanked. That day I walked into him, to ask him, to tell him I wanted to be his chief of staff. Now, it had to be a couple days later. I walked in for some purpose, and I knew I was in the wrong place. I don't know, I'm sure it's happened to you at some time in your lifetime. You walk in, and
yeah, when I walked into the ladies' room at the State House one day because I was so distracted by something going on.
You're in the wrong place.
Yeah.
But it turned out that he was on the phone telling one of those candidates that he was going to name me and he did it on Christmas Eve. And so, as soon as I walked in, rarely did I see him get ashen, but he did. And I said, uh-oh, this is the wrong place for me to be. And I just immediately turned around, and then he buzzed me. And that buzz didn't happen very often, you know, from his office to your office. So then he buzzed me, said, could you come in and see me? And I thought, well, this is going to be a pretty good day, I hope. It's Christmas Eve, and it was.
There seems to be a lesson in there. If you want something, let it be known. Ask for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we got into a situation, he was a great teacher of things like that. And that's what I mean about his being so astute at, and I don't think he studied this stuff. I think he just discovered it over the years. We had a commissioner resign and then want to take back his resignation right after the first term. Frankly, it was a commissioner that we were not upset had resigned, and Governor Kane was not upset that he had resigned, and then asked for it to be withdrawn. And the governor wouldn't withdraw it. And I said to him, why? He said, I never want him to say that I asked him to stay or withdraw his resignation. Pretty telling. I mean, to me, that's pretty telling.
What does it say?
It just says that he understood that he was the governor. He did it in a nice way, but he did not want people to be beholden to him at all, because I think if people feel that way, they tend to act a little bit differently than when you are the person who's been given that position because you asked for it. So it was a good decision on his part.
So the key legislators you had to deal with when you were deputy chief of staff were the two leaders, really,
Right.
the two Democratic leaders.
Right. And of course the Republicans were in the minority. Republicans were in the minority in the Senate the entire time we were in office. They took the Senate back, or they took the Assembly back, and remember Chuck Hardwick became Speaker when in 1985 we won by the largest plurality that's ever been recorded in the state history.
You were working in the governor's office during that election year.
I was. By the way, he didn't decide to run until 2 weeks before the filing deadline in April.
Really?
Yeah, and that was, it wasn't a game. It was, I really don't think Debbie wanted him to run again.
Why?
I just think Debbie was a very shy individual and liked to be at home and liked him to be with her. And I think it was a difficult decision for him to decide to run. And then, once he did, it was just, he had done so many good things over those years that it.
Things like what jumped, anything jump out?
Well, we had done the education reform, I think, during that period of time, putting teacher salaries to 18.5, which it had not been done previously. Plus, he was out with the people all the time. I remember going to the last campaigns, one of the two last campaign stops we had. We did one down at Georgian Court College, and we had mailed a postcard with the governor's picture on the front to all the senior citizens in the Lakewood area, there must have been 3,000 people at this event. And I didn't realize that the people would want his autograph as much as they did because I had this card with him. I think we were at the event for 3 hours. And we had gotten labor support. If you remember, he had done the Transportation Trust Fund. We'd put people back to work. He used to say that the state bird is the crane, not the bird crane, but the cranes that were existing in the state, because there was construction going all over the place. We went to Richie Tessier's last stop, night before Election Day.
Richie was a labor
union leader at his facility in Newark. And I didn't know they had a downstairs auditorium. And we pulled up at the place, and of course we had the trooper with us because they traveled with the governor. And I thought, this doesn't look like going to be many people here. And we walked downstairs into this room with 1,500 laborers screaming and hollering and, clapping and cane for governor signs. And I said, wow, this is just unbelievable. This is going to be.
They're supposed to be clapping and cheering for Democrats.
Yes, exactly.
What was it about Tom Kean that they liked?
Well, he put them back to work. The economy was terrific. We had increased taxes during the first year. Money started to flow into state government. Reagan was in office. Most of those, not most, what do I know? A number of those labor people had voted for Ronald Reagan. The economy, as I say, was booming. And Tom Kean was a nice guy. Tom Kean, he would go to the labor rallies. We marched on Labor Day in Asbury Park in the Labor Day parade that honors the founder of Labor Day, whose name escapes me at this point. But he would go to the inner cities and sign bills in the inner cities. And he probably had as much Democratic support as he had Republican support during that time.
How important was the African American support?
Huge. Remember, he had done, I believe during the first term, we had divested in South Africa, and he signed that bill. He had met with Coretta Scott King prior to signing the bill. He was certainly friends with a number of the African American members of the Assembly, at least, Willie Brown. That person comes to mind.
Who sponsored that divestiture bill in the legislature.
Right. And so We had gone to Newark to sign many bills. We'd gone to Irvington, Patterson, all of the, quote, Abbott districts, which became Abbott districts but weren't then. That's where we targeted. And he had, he had a Democratic, as I say, the Assembly for the entire 8 years was all Democratic, but let's talk about the first 4. So every piece of legislation that came out of the Assembly is sponsored by a Democrat then. Same thing in the Senate. The Senate is controlled by the Democrats, so that legislation is sponsored by the Democrats. So it was easy for us. We got in trouble with our Republican legislators for that purpose, because we would constantly be going to the the inner cities to sign this legislation in Democratic-controlled districts. As it turned out, it was a very smart thing for us to do.
As I recall, in that Democratic primary in '85, there were 5 candidates. Peter Shapiro, John Russo, Bob Del Tufo, Steve Wiley, and Ken Gibson, I think, were the 5.
God bless you, Michael.
Thank you. In hindsight, might Russo have been a tougher opponent than Shapiro?
I don't know if anybody was going to be a tougher opponent. I really don't. I think what happened was the Democrats couldn't unite behind somebody. And you remember Shapiro, John Russo would have probably been a more difficult candidate because he came from Ocean County. Shapiro had gotten himself in difficulty in his own home county of Essex County with his own Democratic organization. And I was very close with Ray Durkin. We all...
Ray Durkin was the county chairman. Shapiro was sort of the reformer, and there was the sort of the organization that was anti-reform.
Well, it was kind of, not that I want to make this ethnic, but I think it was kind of, you're right, Shapiro was the reformer, who was a young Jewish kid from South Orange, and all the Irish people, the Irish Catholic crew, the Durkins, the Giblins, the Codys, were all, they were on the other side. And many of those people, at least, had to have voted for Governor Kane. Governor Kane won, and you'll know this figure better than I do, we lost 3 municipalities in the state of New Jersey. 3. Chislehurst, Roosevelt, and one other one that I can't remember. But we won Newark, Irvington, any of the urban areas he won in 1985.
Was that known all through the campaign, so that it wasn't really that tough a campaign?
No, it was a very difficult campaign.
How so?
Because it was a lot of work. We had spent a lot of time in making sure that the legislators knew that how much support we had given them in signing the legislation, and we worked hard with the Republican County Committee chairs, and we worked hard. Andy Consovoy did a good job. Let me throw that name out to you, because Andy, who worked in our appointments office, was actually appointments counsel, had been a long time just political junkie, and he had loved Tom Kean for years before I even knew Governor Kane. And Andy did a very good job with a lot of Hudson County Democratic mayors and convincing them to join. I think Frank Rogers became Democrats for Kane. Frank Rogers was the longest serving mayor in the history of the state of New Jersey, was the mayor of Harrison at the time.
45 years.
Was it 45? So, it wasn't a cakewalk, but raising money was not real difficult because we were perceived to be the front runner. Sometimes that can be difficult. We knew Peter Shapiro had a little bit of trouble raising money because he had his own internal strife within his county that he was dealing with. And Ray may have been Democratic state chair then. I can't remember if he was the county chair or Democratic state chair. Ray Durkin.
Right.
And Ray was kind of friendly to our administration. I'm not saying that he laid down, but Peter Shapiro was not well liked. I did not think we would win the way we won, but it was a good campaign.
What did you do during the campaign?
I continued to do what I was supposed to be doing in the governor's office. We had, Submergent was the press secretary, Bill Palatucci was running the campaign.
Golden was the communications director, and John Submergent worked under Carl Golden.
John Submergent was over at the campaign.
Oh,
that's how John first started.
Oh, he was the campaign press secretary.
Correct.
And who else did you just name?
Bill Palatucci was the campaign director. My responsibility was obviously to coordinate with the campaign as to what was going on, and we would meet with them after, and Greg and I would meet with them 2 or 3 times a week over at Frank Holman's where the Republican State Committee was. Frank Holman was the Republican State Chairman at the time, and that's where the campaign
There used to be
based.
a little yellow or a little elephant in the window of that office on West State Street.
Well, Frank Holman set the record for most parking tickets in the history of
I thought you were going to
Trenton.
say for most elephants in the
No,
office.
no. I said to Carl Golden, Frank passed away, and I said to Carl, I'm really sorry to hear about Frank Holman. He said to me, well, he shouldn't have started his mornings with martinis. Everything would have been fine.
But he used to get a lot of tickets on West State Street, did he?
Yeah, it was down, it was on the other side of where the hotel is, you know, and whatever, very close to where,
Beyond Calhoun Street.
yeah, very close to where Community Affairs used to be, and it was in it was a very attractive old building that had the Pennsylvania flagstone on the front of it. But he did. I think he just piled them up on the dashboard of his Lincoln, as I remember.
You said earlier that Tom Kean dealt with Alan Karcher successfully and well. I can remember during that gubernatorial campaign that as Shapiro kind of faded, that Karcher stepped into the breach. The Assembly and the Senate were both up for election also in '85, and that Karcher was out there campaigning against the Kean record.
Mm-hmm. But it was falling on deaf ears. I'm sorry.
No, you're right. How do you think Tom Kean successfully handled Alan Karcher? How did he blunt Karcher's impact?
By doing the things that he would do, but not with Alan Karcher there. By going to the Democratic districts with the sponsor of the legislation, Karcher not being a sponsor of the legislation, but having those people present with him, even the two Assembly people, if they were Democrats, being with the senators signing it in the district. And you do enough of those, and I think the legislators themselves start to say, well, why is this guy attacking a guy who's come to my district and shown me recognition by doing a couple of appointments for legislators to boards or commissions? I mean, that was one of my responsibilities when I was chief of staff, and I did a lot of that when I was deputy chief of staff too. You know, you do 4,000 appointments approximately in 4 years period of time. And if a legislator comes to you with a very qualified candidate, and a lot of these boards and commissions have to be bipartisan boards and commissions, you can easily throw the legislator a bone by giving him his appointee to a board or commission, by dealing with judges. You know, technically you're supposed to have an equal number of Republicans and equal number of Democrats. So if a opposing party legislator comes to you and says, I've got a candidate for a judgeship, would you consider him? And the governor considers him, it's a nice thing for that legislator. And we did a lot of that.
When Kean informed you on Christmas Eve that you'd be chief of staff heading into the second term, what did that mean for you personally?
I was gratified, obviously. I had been through a little bit of a difficult period of time in that there was that time between Greg leaving, and it was about 6 weeks before I was named. So, but that taught me a little bit of a lesson.
What did it teach you?
It taught me that I earned it. I earned his respect, that out of the people that he was considering, he wanted me, and that gave me confidence going into the second term. And confidence, I thought that we were going to be able to take this governor and hopefully make him be more than just the governor of the state of New Jersey. And we really believed that, I mean, I firmly believe that had in 1988 George Bush chosen Tom Kean as his vice president, that he probably would have been reelected. But he didn't, and it didn't happen. But those were exciting times. I mean, because he won by so much, northeastern state, Republican governor, well-liked by the people, starting to get national attention. We flew up to New Hampshire, gave a speech, you know, shortly after, it was probably February of '86 would be my guess. Steve Provo went with him. He was doing the book, The Politics of Inclusion. He'd made that decision.
Steve Provo wrote that book with him? Or
Steve Provo, yes.
was a speechwriter?
No, Steve Provo wrote the book with the governor.
Uh-huh.
Or, yes, Provo ended up going to, I haven't seen him in years, but I think he became a fairly high officer in PepsiCo, and then when they split off and he went to Kentucky Fried Chicken, I think did pretty well with them. But we were getting national attention, and we were getting it because of who he was and how well or how big he had won in the election of '85.
Was he serving in that second term with an eye toward
No.
the vice presidency?
No. And yeah, again, I go back to April of 1985 when it was 2 weeks before filing date, and he'd still not decided to run for governor. I don't think he wanted to be vice president, and I think that probably hurt him in becoming the vice president. I mean, Roger Ailes is the fellow who found Dan Quayle. Or decided that that's who should be George Bush Sr.'s vice presidential candidate.
Roger Ailes is a fairly conservative-leaning Republican.
He is.
Not Tom Kaine's kind of Republican. Is
Right.
that what you're
Well,
implying?
I don't know. I mean, I just think it fit. You know, somebody from the Midwest. If you put Kaine and Bush Sr. in a room together, you've got two clones. I mean, they're Yale. I mean, he's a Yale. He's Princeton's. Tom's a Princetonian. They kind of dress the same way. You know, I used to say to the governor, "Come on, we got to straighten up the tie," and he'd pull his tie to the right. You know, and so it'd be off crooked. You know, and he'd come into the office and there'd be dog hair all over him from the collies, and I'd have what is that called? The thing you rub back and up and down to try and get all the dog hair off. The shoes were never polished. So, I mean, and George Bush was the same way. I got to meet him on many different occasions because he and Governor Kaine became friends, or maybe had been friends before this, through the family. But but those were fun times to be chief of staff. I mean, we're very popular. The budget's fine. Money's still coming into the state of New Jersey. We now at least have a Republican assembly, although they became a pain in the ass. But we had a Republican assembly, and we still had Democrats, but the governor had tennis with John, or tennis with Tommy, as we referred to it. So they were getting along well, and we got some, although I was not involved in a lot of the policy side because I was in charge of running the office, appointments of boards and commissions, the schedule, the governor's office budget. There were some policy things that came up, the Environmental Infrastructure Trust, which I think got a different name we did during that period of time. But I mean, he was under serious consideration for national office at that point.
You said the assembly was a pain in the ass.
The Republicans.
The Republicans.
Yeah, well, I mean, they had taken over, and they wanted to go to Giants games and Jets games, and they wanted to do all the fun things that they thought they should be entitled to do at that point. And they gave us a hard time on one of the budgets, if you'll remember. We had to get Joe Buckaloo to call Joe Moran at Jeff Moran at 4 o'clock in the morning one time, because they wouldn't give us the 41st vote in the assembly. And Jeff was mad because I hadn't asked him to a Meadowlands or to a Giant game.
Because you had not.
I had not asked that. So, happens.
Chuck Hardwick was the Speaker of the Assembly during those 4 years.
He was. Chuck was a good guy.
Was he good?
Yeah, I think Chuck wanted to be the governor more than anything.
He ran in '89.
He did.
We thought he might win, and then I think he finished second or third.
I think you're right. But Chuck was fairly easy to deal with, and because I think Chuck's a decent human being. And so I would interact with him, but more on the appointment side. And Mike Cole and he did a lot of work together on the legislative side, because Mike was in charge of doing the legislation, through counsel's office.
Were you chief of? I think you were chief of staff during the whole controversy around the reappointment of Chief Justice Willents.
I was.
Tell us that story, would you?
Sure. It was pretty clear that the legislature did not want, and in particular Republicans did not want Willents reappointed. It was
a democratically controlled Senate that would have the sway.
Correct. And there was general feeling among the legal community, I believe, that the Chief Justice had been overactive on the legislative front, that they had done an awful lot of decisions. And that may have been the Mount Laurel one, and I think it probably was.
Mount Laurel was decided, the second Mount Laurel was decided in 1983.
Right, he was Chief Justice at the time, I
Right.
believe. And that was a huge controversy. Council of Affordable Housing, I mean, all that stuff was believed to have been, by the public or by the legislature, whomever it may be, to have been legislating from the bench.
I think there was an Abbott decision, one of the many
Probably.
Abbott decisions was also in the early
Yep.
80s.
Yeah. And there was a general feeling that that Wilentz should not be reappointed as Chief Justice. There was even discussion about appointing him as a justice, and there was the argument that let's switch the balance of power. We're Republicans. Let's make somebody else the Chief Justice, but we can reappoint him as a justice. And the governor has said to me, and he's probably said this to you, said to me after he submitted the nomination, that he believes it helped save the Constitution. Now, I don't know that that's the case, but he firmly believed that we should not politicize the Supreme Court. And that would have been the beginning, in his mind, particularly with a Chief Justice, that would have been the beginning of the politicization of the Supreme Court.
He had called the Mount Laurel decision communistic.
He did.
So people tried to hold him to that when he would reappoint the guy who wrote the decision.
Right.
How do you think he rationalized that?
Well, there are two things. I think that he believed, again, that he did not want to politicize the Supreme Court. I also believe, and I've learned this subsequent to my leaving office and still spending time, not a great deal of time with the governor, but he had a very special relationship with Leon Hess. And Bob Wilentz was Leon Hess's son-in-law. And I don't know that there was any discussion at all about that during that period of time, but I think he also may have I think he respected Wilentz, particularly when Wilentz was in the Senate.
In the Assembly.
Assembly or Senate?
Assembly.
Maybe they even served together.
I think they did in the early 70s.
And I think he knew he was very bright, and I think he liked him personally. And so once he made the decision, the fallout was not as great as anybody expected it to be. It lasted for a short period of time, and we went on.
And yet, the night of the reappointment vote in the Senate, the board was stuck at 20 to 19 in favor of reappointment, and they suspended debate for 3 or 4 hours while a final arm had to be twisted, and that was
Lee Laskin.
Lee Laskin, right. So it did, and there was the whole controversy about whether Wilentz lived in New York or in New Jersey, and him talking about his wife's cancer and her need to be near her doctors in New York.
Yeah.
So
It was a difficult period of time. I don't think it was more difficult for those that surrounded the governor, I think, than it was for the governor himself. I mean,
you think he felt he had done the right thing?
Absolutely. I know he felt that he had done the right thing. Absolutely. And I think if you asked him today, he'd still say to you he had done the right thing.
Did it cost him with his party at all? Do you?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's what wing of the party was very upset. It cost him a jury card now. The only, and Jerry was fine with us during the whole time. There were 2 senators that I can remember during my 7 years with him, and I can't remember at what point this occurred, that ended up disliking Tom Kean to the point where there was disdain for Tom Kean, and that was John Dorsey, who was from Morris County, and Joe Bubba, who was from Passaic County. And that can be said that if you must be doing a great job if those 2 guys disliked you. So they didn't like me either.
When you said it, Bubba popped into my head. I didn't come up with Dorsey.
Mike Cole used to. Well, Dorsey thing was a little bit different reason, but Mike Cole came up with an expression one time that we have a better Bubba bill. I said, what? Yeah, we're going to call this a better Bubba bill. So we kind of use that.
Did Kean care a lot about the state's image?
Oh, of course. Of course. I mean, that's
Was that part of his legacy, would you say?
absolutely. I mean, the New Jersey and You Perfect Together commercials, which were really Greg Stevens' idea, was brilliant. We got some criticism for it, if you remember, because it was during the first term that we started the commercials, and people were accusing us of using them for political purposes. But they were masterful. And I mean, I don't know why we've gotten away from that, because, I mean, that's what the state was known for at that point.
Clearly, they were used for political purposes. I mean, they helped humanize the governor.
They did. Yep. Sitting on the beach in the sweater down at Island Beach State Park certainly helped.
That was Greg Stevens's area of expertise.
It was media, the electronic media in particular. Even though he had come from the print media, Greg recognized how important the electronic media was. And it was really his, when I talk about the push pins in New York and Pennsylvania, that started when I was deputy chief of staff.
He worked at the Woodbridge News Tribune, a paper that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, and then went down to Washington and ended up being John McCain's consultant in the presidential race. And unfortunately...
In 2000.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And then he got cancer.
He was very successful financially, and then he developed cancer about 3 years ago and passed away.
What do you think Tom Kane's greatest strength was as a leader?
The ability to convince people that the policies that he is advocating are the right policies, that the budget he has put forth to the state is the right budget, that it's okay to take care of the downtrodden. I think that just his ability to deal with people just amazed me. I mean, I used to say often, if we could put him in the back seat of the car with every American and just, you know, travel for a half an hour, I mean, he would have been the president of the United States. I worked for him for 7 years, 4 of those years having virtually daily access in some way, shape, or form. I saw him mad, visibly mad, 2 times in those 7 years.
Do you remember the times?
I do. Remember, one was with Gary Stein over, and I can't remember what it was.
Gary Stein was Director of Policy and Planning before Kane put him on the Supreme Court.
Correct. And he was very mad at Gary one day. And the second time, he was mad at John Dorsey. And those are the only...
In Dorsey's presence or not?
No, I never saw him get mad. I never heard him raise his voice in those 7 years. Yeah, I never heard him once.
Is that automatically a good trait, or should a leader sometimes make people fear him?
I don't know how to answer that. I mean, I don't think it's necessary to make people fear you. I mean, I think you can get done a lot more in politics with sugar or with compromise, and you don't have to necessarily get mad at the other person. And I think that's one of the things I think that got Alan Karcher so mad was that Tom Kane would not get mad. You know, I think he would try and bait him to get him mad, and he wouldn't fall for it. John Russo started it. John Russo tried to get him mad, and he couldn't get him mad. And I just think that's a wonderful aptitude for somebody to have.
To keep your composure.
At all times, yeah. And plus, he had a great sense of humor, which a lot of people may have not seen. You know, it's just, he enjoyed a good laugh. He enjoyed goofing on people a little bit and getting a laugh over it.
Was there a quality of his that annoyed you, or?
Sure. I was annoyed that I didn't know he was going to Drew. I didn't know it. So that and there's another quality that he had that kind of annoyed me because I didn't know what was going on. He would let cabinet officers have access to him, and none of us knew it on the staff. And that's fine, except we'd like to know at least what the cabinet officer said to you. I mean, he'd think nothing of having Saul Cooperman make a phone call to him, or Saul coming into a meeting and them meeting privately and not having a staff person in there, which is a great attribute for him. I'm not sure it was real good for the staff. But the most disappointed I was not knowing about Drew.
Well, did he know about Drew long before he left off?
Oh, I don't think he knew. He probably knew 6 or 8 months before it. And it was just, one of those things that, to me, was a little bit annoying.
Did it, it didn't undermine your ability to
Absolutely.
do work for him?
No, absolutely not.
You just personally wish you had known.
I can't tell you why I personally wish that I had known. I mean, just that it kind of disturbed me that as chief of staff, he didn't say to me. I found it out through another source, and he didn't tell me. But when I said to him at some point, "Gee, I really would have liked to have known," he said, "Well, you're going to go on and do something in your life. You don't have to tell me." I said, "You know what? You're right." And virtually anybody who's worked for him has worked in a high-level position for him, has gone on to do pretty good things or done pretty well financially, and it was a wonderful experience.
What have you gone on to do?
I've gone on to become I went back to my old law firm and stayed there for a short period of time, and then went with a fairly large law firm from 1991 through 1995. And then, if you remember George Albanese, he was Commissioner of Human Services. He had been doing something differently, and we had lunch one day, and he said, "Why don't we hook up and we can do some consulting in government affairs?" And I did that from 1995 till 2005, and then in 2005 I decided I wanted to do government affairs on my own, even though I am an attorney, but I do primarily government affairs, or 90% of what I do is government affairs.
How many clients do you have?
8 very good, solid clients, and do nothing hourly anymore, do all monthly retainers, so it's worked out very nicely.
Enjoy it?
I like it very much. I would like to see a little bit more stability in the legislature. I mean, there's just so much turnover now in the Assembly in particular, that, and everybody, I'm a lobbyist, so I get 120 invites every 3 months from 120 different people. You got to pick and choose who you're going to be your friends here. So, but it's good. There's just been tremendous turnover, and it's difficult for me to recognize. Well, you've been doing this for as long as I have, or longer. It's 25 years ago that I was named chief of staff. I mean, that's a long time. And so you walk through the State House, and everybody's different. It's nice now, at least when I walk through the State House, a lot of people are back because we've got a Republican governor. So some people that I worked for are back in the administration again. And that's a nice feeling, nice feeling.
You say you served on the Racing Commission since 1995?
Correct.
And that the casino industry has cut into horse racing in the state, or horse racing has just fallen on hard times because it's not the popular entertainment it was?
I think it's a combination of both. It's the casino industry. I mean, it's a much different industry than horse racing. Horse racing takes too long, and it's complicated and it's expensive to raise horses, and I just think the racing industry is in a great deal of difficulty in the country, not only in the state.
Is there a Kane alumni club?
There's not.
Unofficially? Or?
No, not really. Peter Peretti, who was the Attorney General for a year, kept us all together pretty well for a couple of years. He would do a luncheon at the Morristown Club. But there is no coordination, and everybody's gone on. I mean, people are all over the place now. Brenda Davis, I'm told, is now out in Idaho. Hazel's primarily down in Florida. Gene McCaffrey has passed away. Borden Putnam passed away. Charlie Sereno, who was our labor commissioner, has passed away. I mean, I find it fortunate to get to see the governor when I see the governor, whether it's for lunch or I'm at an event that I get to see him, but nobody has tried to keep, and all of us, when we left, were relatively young because we had been appointed at a young age, and so all of us went on to do something different and create our own niche in life. So there is no Kane Alumni Association.
If one worked for Tom Kane and had a successful run as you did, does that mean one automatically roots for Tom Kane Jr. to carry on the family?
Oh, I would love
banner?
to see. I would love to see Tom Kane Jr. be the governor or be a United States senator. I mean, I traveled with Tom Jr. when we went to the Far East, if you remember, a number of times, and we were able to successfully bring Far Eastern businesses to New Jersey to locate here. And on one of those trips, I traveled with Tom Jr. He was then a Dartmouth student. Maybe he was at Tufts at the time. I think he was at Dartmouth. Thanks, Nance. And I mean, it's a great trip, and so he's become a friend, and I was at his wedding, and to get to see the kids. And I think deep down, though, he'd rather be a U.S. senator. Be a
Do
great
you?
Yeah, I do. I think he'd really. I think his foreign service, and frankly, running every 6 years is a lot better than trying to run every 4. And I do think that he'd like to be a U.S. senator. He hasn't said that to me, but that's just my own personal opinion.
When you look back on the Kane administration, and you served through almost all of it.
I did. I think I'm still the longest-serving chief of staff.
Really?
I think in New Jersey.
Of any?
Of any. I think. I mean,
4 years.
A little bit longer.
A little bit
because
longer.
December 24th of '85, and we left on January the 16th of 2000, something like that. And there have been a whole lot of chiefs of staff since then, and there were a whole lot of chiefs of staff before then.
It's a burnout job.
Unless you work for Tom Kane. I mean, he doesn't burn you out that badly.
Huh.
I mean, I worked hard. But I kind of established a schedule where I was not going to do very early morning and very late at night. I was going to do one or the other. And so, I did the 9:15. I would get to the office, and then we'd leave at 6:30 or 7, or go to an event with him that evening. And I mean, is it taxing to go to every Giant game and every Jet game that's been played at the Meadowlands? Yeah, it's a little bit taxing, but you're driven in, you're driven out. So I'd go to the house in Livingston, meet him there. By the way, I'm just thinking of another story. The last Giant football game was a playoff game. We were still in office, which would have been January of 2000.
You mean, 1990.
Let's see, thank you. Time flies. The State Police Bagpipe Band came to his house in Livingston and marched up the driveway. It was unbelievable. Wow, getting choked up. Because it was our last event. But, oh my God, it was wild.
You're making me see it and feel it.
Good. It was neat. It was neat.
How would you characterize the Kane years in New Jersey?
Prosperous, well-governed, best gubernatorial period of time, I think, in 50 years. Maybe not. I don't know.
Good luck because of the economy?
Everything worked. He is a master. He's a great politician. He knew how to run government. Everything kind of all fell in line together. The economy turned around. Reagan, we went through the recession in '81. Then, Reagan came out of the recession, or started to come out of the recession. We take office. We've got all kinds of problems. Ken Biederman, who was the treasurer, is running in every day saying the revenues are down. It's no different than what's happening today. We try and do a gas tax. If you remember, they beat the hell out of the gas tax. We never get that through. We finally get a tax through that turns around, and the economy turns around. So money starts to flow in, and for the next 8 years, we just never had a budget problem, other than the one time we had trouble getting the Republicans to vote for it in the Assembly. And then the He let cabinet officers be cabinet officers. We had a policy, you know, we announced the good news, you announced the bad news. He had the ability to interact with people and get along with people. Always kept his staff on its toes. Never knew when it was my turn in the kettle to be burned for a week or 2 or 10 days. Then
he could do that.
It's the best. He was the best. He was the best. Over nothing. I have no idea.
Just making you feel uncomfortable?
Just no idea. Not, you know, just it's your turn, Ed. You know, and we would all say it, or Mike Cole would say to me, Ed, it's your turn. Or Debbie Poritz, when she came in, you know, for the last year as chief counsel, Debbie, relax. It's just your turn. We're going to all get through. Brendan could walk into me one day and say, I don't understand what's going on. Well, he's just keep me on your toes. That's all. We'll figure this out. And he had a great ability to do that. And I think he knew he was doing it too. I don't think he did it, didn't know that he was doing it. You know, Carl would say the same thing to me. I don't understand why he's pissed off at me. I said, well, Carl, I don't know either, but we'll get through this one.
And yet you say you never saw him lose his temper except for
did.
twice. So this was a quiet kind of a chill that he would put on people?
He put the chill on you. He would put the chill on you. Yeah. And you never knew for what reason the chill was on. And you weren't in it for that long, but while you were in it, you kept wondering, why am I in this? And you know, you try and figure out, what did I do here?
You brought up the tax situation in the first year. You say he had proposed a hike in the gas tax. Did the legislature turn around and make him sign both a sales tax and an income tax hike instead? Do you recall?
Yeah, I think they did.
I think they did too.
But I think it went from 5 to 6%, if I'm not mistaken, and they increased the income tax. You're right, because it was very low. I want to say very low. I mean, who wants to pay income taxes anyway? But it was like 2.6% was the high level, I think, or highest level, and it went up after that.
And I think he signed that bill either saying he was holding his nose or literally holding his nose.
I don't think he literally held his nose, but he signed another bill that way too, as I remember. Didn't he sign the prayer bill that way, the school prayer bill, saying I'm going to sign it, but you guys do with it what you want, and sent it back to them and said, if you want to override me, override me. He told me they would only override him once. I mean, this one he said it's okay to override me.
Huh.
But he said to me, they won't, Ed, as long as you're here, understand, if we're ever overridden, they'll only do it once, because they'll never override us again.
Are you nostalgic for those days?
They were great days, Mike. Am I nostalgic for them? I
Yeah.
mean, I know you can't go back, but they were the best 4 years of my career. They weren't the best 4 years financially, but they were the most rewarding personally, those 4 years. Those 7 years, but the 4 years in particular. I mean, I got to see the world. I mean, we were in the Far East on 4 different occasions. We had a sister state relationship in Hangzhou, China. We went to Hangzhou, and he said to me, Ed, do me a favor, call back to the office. I think I remember Richard Nixon being here. And I called back to the office and got Grady, or Bob Grady, who was our director of communications, or Steve Provo, or got somebody on the phone. And I'd say, and it was before Google and all that. I said, just find this out for us. And it turns out that not only had Nixon been to Hangzhou, he had planted, what are those sequoias? He brought sequoias with him, small little sequoias from California when he visited Hangzhou, because they had negotiated the Shanghai Accords on the west, which were signed in Shanghai, but they were negotiated at the West Lake, which we visited in Hangzhou, China. And the governor stood up and gave this speech about our relationship with Hangzhou and with China should be just like the sequoia trees that President Nixon brought with him on such and such a date. And I mean, tears are in people's eyes in the audience, because he's talking about that they need to grow big and grow strong. And I mean, it was just an unbelievable experience. And so, and then we did Korea, because it turned, and Ming Shu was with us, and Ming Shu was our director of international trade, who I've stayed very close with over the years. And she's just a wonderful lady and did a great job for us. And she was from China originally. Her father was before the communists took over. And she understood apparently that the Japanese companies were locating on the West Coast. And because of what the Japanese had done to the Koreans didn't want to be anywhere near them on the West Coast, so they'd come to the East Coast. So we were able to get Samsung, Lucky Gold Star, Hyundai, all who located their world headquarters in the state of New Jersey.
How interesting. Palisades Park is a Korean
Exactly.
enclave.
Well, they want to be, I'm serious, they not that there are not a lot of Japanese immigrants that are in New York City, but
And in Fort Lee and Englewood.
Right.
Or Fort Lee and Edgewater,
Yep.
that area.
So, but it's because so many Korean companies located here. I'm going to tell one funny story about the first trip to Hangzhou, because you'll remember that the governor missed the first governor's ball in 1982 because he was in the hospital with a bad back. So everywhere we went, we would call ahead and make sure that there was a board in between the mattress and the box spring. And we got to Hangzhou, China, in this lovely hotel, and I'm thinking, how can this be a nice hotel? But it was Swiss-owned. And I went to my room, and he went to his room, and the phone rang. Ed, yes, Governor. Come here, please. I say. So I walked down and into his room, and he said, Ed, do me a favor. Yes, Governor. He said, sit on my bed. So I sat on the bed. This was the day afterward, the first night, I'm sorry. And I sat on the bed. They had taken the plywood and put it on top of the mattress. So I said, oh, did you sleep on that last night? He said, yep, sure did. And I know he hadn't, you know. But, that was just one of the little things that happened to us on our trips.
So how should New Jerseyans regard Tom Kane as we head deeper into the 21st century?
They should ask whomever is sitting in the governor's chair now to try and run the state like Tom Kane ran the state, and try and treat people the way Tom Kane treated people. And if they do that, the state's going to be fine.
Thank you very much, Ed.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.